Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're just going to talk a little bit about this here HD 7770 VaporX because, well, it's a VaporX card, so that's why I have one, right? Picked it up on eBay for I think around 20 quid, so that's actually not that bad a price for one of these because for some reason they regularly go for 30. Which just blows my mind because it's a 7770, and like, yes, it's a VaporX 7770, but it's still a 7770. Like, these things were slow when they came out. So, yeah. Anyway, I picked one of these up because I'm a Sapphire fanboy and especially a fan of, like, VaporX stuff from Sapphire, right? Like, I'm slowly starting to accumulate a bunch of VaporX cards, so... yeah, this is one of the, and this is one of the ones where I'm like more excited about it because it is GCN, so it's relatively modern. I know how these clock. I have like, well, I thought I knew how these clock. This has some, this card right here has some interesting quirks that are actually rather annoying, but something that, like, at least it gives me something to work on with the card, right? It's not just mod VCore and bam, off to the races, right? You win everything. As long as you have a bigger heatsink and better core. So, yeah, and the other reason why I picked one of these up is this is actually my favorite heatsink shroud, like, ever. I can't, like, if somebody told me, BuildZoid, name the best looking GPU, it's this. This is, in my opinion, the best looking GPU ever. So... yeah, because it's not overdone, right? Like, it has that kind of, gamer aesthetic, but it's not quite so heavy as, like, say, an ROG Strix card, right? Where it's just, like, it gets ridiculous because you have a bunch of very fine little details. Yeah, this just kind of looks, it's nice and simple, but it's not just a plain box. So I like it a lot, and I picked one of these up. And also, well, no, I think the sticker's definitely not on straight. That just kind of slightly bugs me, is that this isn't on straight, and I can't change that. I guess I could just take it off and then have no stickers anywhere on the actual shroud, but then it's hard to tell that it's even a Sapphire card anymore, but I guess that wouldn't really be that big a deal. Anyway, so yeah, I picked it up because it looks good, because it's a 7770, and small AMD GPUs like 7770s, 7790s, 7850s, 7870s, and all of the cards based on these chips, like this is Cape Verde, there's Bonaire, and then there's also Pitcairn. And all three of these cores, like, they're really, really fun to overclock because they scale great with voltage. They clock way higher than something like a Tahiti or a Hawaii. They pull much less power. They're not as expensive, so if you blow them up, it's not such a big deal. Like, they're more interesting to work with, in my opinion. Like, they're more fun to work with just because they're kind of small, and also, like, the performance scaling is quite nice from them because... yeah, you can really push a card like this quite far. And so obviously I went to town on this thing, right? Like, though I didn't go as far as, well, like, there's more that I kind of need to do with this card. But unfortunately I need to get, like, a sacrificial card because, again, this is like a VaporX card. It has the VaporX PCB, which it's actually not that different from a reference card. There's barely any difference. I mean, you do get the sort of sea green PCB color. But other than that, I mean, the main difference is that you have different inductors, which we have to take the card apart for you to see. Yeah, it's not that special, but it's still, like, I'd like to keep this as a VaporX card where it's VaporX heatsink on a VaporX PCB and just everything's VaporX. And similar to how on the 290X VaporX I have, I'm not, like, I'm making all of the mods I'm doing on that card are just set up so that they clear the entire, like, they clear the shroud, they clear the, well, no, they clear the heatsink, they clear the back plate and everything. So similarly with this card, I'm trying to keep it relatively, relatively stock by my standards, or more like, well, no, it's not relatively stock, heavily modified, but within, like, sort of reason. Okay, it's not one of those cards where it's just like the only way to run this is with a core-only water block or an LN2 pot. Like, I want this to actually be able to run on the stock cooler. So, get this unplugged. But, yeah, so what really makes the sort of, like, the biggest difference between, like, a reference 7770 and a VaporX 7770 is the color of the PCB. and then the inductors, right? So you can see that they have the sort of little fins. They're not even fins, they're just grooves in them, but, you know, like, eh. I don't really think it functionally achieves much of anything. You also get the Sapphire logo on the side of the inductors, so yeah, it's just a minor thing, but still, I'd prefer to just keep it as a VaporX card. Oh, and here you can see how the extension PCB over here is attached, so that's just like soldered on. Which yeah, that's a nice solid connection. I mean, I'm not a fan of these wires being as thin as they are, so I might actually reinforce that a bit with some more wires, because yeah, it's like it doesn't really like if you just work with it, then it doesn't really feel like it's going to come off, but it could be more reinforced as far as I'm concerned. Like, it could be beefier. It's not going anywhere anytime soon, but it could be more reinforced. So that's what's going on with that. Anyway, I guess let's do a little bit of a PCB analysis. Not the full thing, because who cares? It's a 7770. I mean, if you want to work on a 7770 for like your own overclocking adventures, then I'd say, yeah, great card to go for. If you want to learn how to volt mod, very, very easy. Though there are some weird, actually, I'd say you might want to get like a 260X instead, because 260Xs are less weird than this once you really get going. But the thing is, you basically don't have a lot of choice with these in terms of PCBs, because it's like it's basically this PCB, just slightly different layouts every single time. And then, of course, Sapphire has their special inductors on there, which I don't really care that much about. But so you get a 3-phase V-core on all of them, which I've added some heat sinks onto the VRM, which mostly just covers the low side MOSFETs. So I have 2 low side MOSFETs in each phase, and 1 high side MOSFET as well. The low side MOSFETs are actually pretty damn good. They're NT-MFS, so on semiconductor 4935Ns, which is a 3.2 milliohm RDS on MOSFET and at 10 millivolt, at 10 volts gate to source voltage, which the way the voltage controller on this works is this is a ST Micro. I've forgotten what it is, but it's like an L6 something, isn't it? It's an L6788, and that thing actually drives the MOSFETs at straight 12 volts. So, yeah, these are the low side MOSFETs are 3.2 milliohm. There's 2 of them in parallel, so you actually have like each of the phases is pretty damn strong. Like the only the only real thing you can complain about with this VRM is that it's 3 phases instead of more phases. And then the high side MOSFET is just a 4921, which is not the like also on semiconductor 4921, which is not like an incredible high side MOSFET, but it's not a complete disaster. There's definitely worse high side MOSFETs out there. In fact, I think this is roughly the same VRM like per phase configuration of MOSFETs as you would get on like a GTX 480. I think. Like, I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is very similar to a GTX 480's each phase of a GTX 480. So for a card of this size, you know, for a 7770 which pulls basically no power, this is actually quite decent. But I still decided to throw on some extra heat sinks because, I mean, they fit under the stock, like they fit under the heat sink, right? Because again, I want to keep the card with just stock cooler and everything. So if the mod clears the stock cooler, it's good to go. So these clear the stock cooler. This one actually has a bit of a short circuit hazard, which is solved by excessively thick thermal pads. So let's see, you can just about kind of see that there's like 2 capacitor, like there's obviously the little input filtering inductor under this heatsink, but there's also 2 capacitors there, and those are a bit of a short circuit hazard. So instead of getting like a proper shaped heatsink, I just took that one and put a really fat thermal pad in there. And the thermal pad I use is like it's a 2mm 8 watts per meter Kelvin thermal pad, so it's actually really high thermal it's pretty high thermal conductivity. But the thing about this thermal pad is it's actually pretty soft, and it like if you work it into things, it's pretty moldable essentially. So yeah, I pretty much just pressed it in between like all of the gaps there, and it's not like after what I've done with it, it's not 2 millimeters thick anymore, but it's still like it won't let that heatsink short out against those capacitors, which is kind of a concern. And then here I'm using the same Same thermal pad as well. And then both of them are just because the thing is like somebody might be like, builds like you could use thermal glue, like thermal epoxy, or you could use thermal tape. And the thing is, I hate both of those because, well, especially thermal epoxy, because when you thermal epoxy something onto something and then like you're just gonna like you run the risk of ripping off components. So I like to go thermal pad and then just, you know, a single core wire to hold it in place. So that's what's going on with this right here. Is that's actually holding the little heat sinks on there, and those are from the Morpheus Ragentech Morpheus coolers because yeah, I mean I have two of them, and I don't really like, since I move the Morpheus heat sinks from card to card to card, I don't really bother with like VRM proper VRM cooling or VRAM cooling, because a lot of the time I like when I run cards, then you know it's just for short benchmark, so I don't care that much. And so I don't normally just have them sitting in box, like sitting in a box doing nothing. And I was like, well, I mean, here they can be on permanently because, I mean, why would I take them off once they're on? It's not like I'm ever going to e-power this because, again, I want to keep the stock cooler fitting on it. So, yeah, that's kind of that with the VCore VRM. And then we go a single phase up here, which I think is VDDCI, so that would be the memory controller. Then we have the single phase down here, which I think is PEX rail, but I'm not 100% certain about because these little well, like actually the older GCN cards have like a different array of voltages compared to the newer ones. So I'm not 100% sure that I'm correct about what this one is, but, or actually which one of these is what, but like there still has to be somethe to power the PCIe interface. So one of them has to be doing that, maybe also powering the memory controller. Anyway, so those exist. Both are single phases. This one's actually significantly weaker, even though the inductor is like the same size. This is significantly weaker because that MOSFET is actually like zoomed in too far. There we go. Come on, camera. You can do it. Oh, there we go. So this chip right here, that's not a controller. That's actually two MOSFETs in one chip. So normally that package is used for like controllers like this chip over here or that chip over there or, you know, the memory voltage controller over here. But yeah, this right here, this is actually two MOSFETs built into one chip. So that's like super low power because that package is not meant for really high current handling. But still, like that, so that's the lowest power rail on the entire card. Memory VRM is this right here with these two old-fashioned, you know, package. Well, it's not really old. Actually, I'm not sure if this is older than the other package. I think it is. But anyway, so with these like old-fashioned MOSFETs, I like you see these on older. Wait, oops, forgot about the zoom. So memory VRM is up here, yeah, it has these two big fat old-fashioned MOSFETs from On Semiconductor. I don't even know what they are. I don't really care. Memory like GDDR5 pulls a decent amount of power, but not enough for me to care. So that's kind of that. That's a single phase. Yeah, also we like these MOSFETs are really common on like either really cheap motherboards or really old motherboards, like one of the two. So yeah. Anyway, so that's the front of the card, and then on the back of the card, I've just kind of gone to town, right? So we have core voltage control for VCore, which is on the little extension over here. Which I gotta say, I actually love doing my mods on a little extension board. It makes things so much simpler because it's like I'm not looking for... Well, this card, it wouldn't be that hard because there's all this free space everywhere, but I decided, I want to do it this way, so I did it this way. So, yeah, this right here is, you know, switches for VCore on-off. Then we have the potentiometer, which is a 10K for VCore control. Then we have two resistors over here. Two resistors. There. Okay, well, you can see them anyway. So there's two resistors right there, which basically go between that potentiometer and to ground, because that's how I restrict how much voltage range I have. This is set up currently to not allow more than like 1.51 volts. No, 1.51. Yeah, 1.51 volts. I don't know why I thought I said that wrong, but yeah, so that limits it to 1.15 volts because 1.51 there. I need to stop saying. I don't know why I decided to restrict it to such a stupid number. I can't even say it. 1.5 volts. There, we'll just round down from 10 by 10 millivolts. So, yeah, and the reason why it's restricted to that is like on liquid nitrogen, you would potentially want to go higher than that, but I don't want to break this card because again, it's a Vapor X card and I collect these. So I want this thing to keep running, but that doesn't mean just because I'm collecting it doesn't mean it gets to be slow. Right? Like, if it's my card, it can be a Vapor X card, but it has to be a fast one too. So it does still get a core voltage mod. Then we have the screw terminal for voltage measurement. Then we have memory voltage mod. This one doesn't have an on-off switch because it's not a big enough deal for me to care. And then we have another screw terminal for monitoring the voltage. So, yeah. The nice thing about using screw terminals is obviously if I have a like permanent setup for the voltage monitoring, I can just like put in wires and screw them down, and don't have to worry about holding probes in place anymore. Obviously, you could also use some kind of connector, but the thing is, these were more convenient for me to find, and a lot of the time I just throw together some wire to monitor things. So yeah, works well enough for me. It's not super convenient, like it's not the most convenient way to do things, but it's good enough. And I have those screw terminals just like sitting in a box because I got a bunch of them with something and I didn't need to use I got them with something and it's like I'm not using them, so spare screw terminals, I'm gonna use them on something and use them here. So yeah, and then, so those do voltage monitor. So I have voltage monitor, like I can monitor the memory voltage, core voltage, control both. Yeah, other than that, I just went to town with capacitors on the card, of course. I mean, as I do, right? Get bored, add capacitors. So VCore VRM has gotten this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. So these are 560 microfarad RS8 series Nichicon. They're actually FP5K, and then this one over here is a 1200 microfarad RS8 series capacitor. Why didn't I only go with 1200 microfarad capacitors? Because I decided, well, just kind of felt like not doing that. It might actually make sense to go up to 1200 microfarads. I'm not sure, but on all of them. But the thing is sometimes you can run into like the main issue with adding too many capacitors is you might trip over current protection. And this is a little three-phase. So I'm kind of like, maybe it's not the best idea to add like, how many is it? 5. Yeah, 6,000 microfarads more capacitance to it because, if it turns on and it has a bunch of and as those capacitors get charged up, if the current pulled in as the capacitors charge up is too much, it's going to trip the overcurrent protection and it's not going to boot up. And that is just like not something I want to deal with. So considering that the stock bulk capacitance is basically, what is it? That's an 820, that's an 820. I could have probably gone for 1200s. Probably would have worked out fine, but too late now. Other than that, I added a bunch of multi-layer ceramics just about freaking everywhere. So you can't really see them that well, but like there's a multi-layer ceramic over here. That's a 47 microfarad. That's a 47 microfarad. I think there's a 22 as well. There's another 47 on this capacitor. Then we have some 47s over here. Then we have a 22 over there. This is for memory controller. That's for VCore. There's a 22 hiding under the sense wires here, so that's for VCore as well. We've got some for memory power over here. Got some for memory over there, and then memory VRM also got some upgrades. Unfortunately, all of the memory ones don't seem to do anything because the thing is basically when I was overclocking this card, like I was like, you know what, I want to actually like properly test the capacitor mods on this thing. So I did the core voltage mod first because obviously if the capacitors are going to make a difference, it's going to be at higher voltages, higher current, because at higher current poles you have bigger transients, you have more output ripple, so the capacitors have more work to do if you're running more current through the VRM. And so, initially I just did a core voltage mod, and I basically went up to I just raised the core, went up to like 1.23 volts, 1350 megahertz core or something like that, and I started just crashing in 3D Mark Firestrike. So I was like, oh, it's probably because I don't have enough, what was it? I don't remember. Oh, like I was like, oh yeah, so if I add a bunch of capacitors, that's going to fix the crashing. Well, I added a bunch of capacitors. That did not fix the crashing. So, um, and at that point I was like, well, it looks like I'm crashing. You know, I put a little bit more thought into it, and I was like, well, the type of crashing I'm getting looks a bit like the memory controllers freaking out. And that's actually exactly what was happening. So, turns out with these 7770s, as you raise the core voltage, the memory controller gets steadily worse. So when I was running 1325 with the with 1600 megahertz, like no, it was 1325 by like 1640 or something. Like I can't remember the exact settings, but basically I was crashing, and I thought it was because of the core, but it was because of the memory, which I only realized after I added a bunch of capacitors, though. Still, like so basically I didn't like if the like I don't know if the capacitors help because I didn't max out the core. I basically pushed the core high enough that it was a memory problem, and then it was like, oh, it wasn't the core causing the crashing, it was the memory. So yeah, unfortunately it's not the memory chips themselves, which is why all the capacitors that I added onto the memory chips don't actually do anything either. It's the actual memory controller on this thing. And yeah. Well, what I do know is that the capacitors aren't helping the memory controller at the very least, so that's no surprise, if you ask me. Um, so yeah, now the issue is like I'm not sure. Like it might be a thermal thing with the memory controller. Like the memory controller is just getting too hot. It might be that the memory controller needs more voltage. It might be that the memory controller needs less voltage. If it's getting too hot, then it needs less voltage. That's generally how that works. If you have a memory controller and it's overheating, you actually want to reduce the voltage going into it. Which yeah, that's actually really annoying. So ran into that with the card. But other than that, I mean, it does do 1325. It does 1325 core clock on like 1.23 volts. It actually does more than that. It's just that like I couldn't be bothered going up in like 5 megahertz increments. So I don't know where. Like it doesn't do 1350. I know that, but it doesn't stop at 1325 either. So yeah. When I bench, I like to relax, and you know, it's like why force it? I already took the Firestrike first place for a 7770 again. I actually took it when I first did the core voltage mod, but you know, I wanted to push it a little bit further, and so we ended up here with the card looking like this. I still think the caps on the core VRM probably helped. Because the card seems like it might, like I could also just have ridiculous luck with the silicon, but 1300 plus core at only like 1.23 volts is pretty damn high. And the card does over 1400 core at 1.3 volts, but the memory completely craps out at that point. So, yeah, I need to, like, basically what I'm kind of thinking is I need to pick up another 7770 or like a 7750 or just another card using the Cape Verde, the Cape Verde core, and uh, figure out how to fix the memory controller, because I don't want to do that on like I need to figure out what to do with the memory controller, because well, and I don't want to do that on this card because my experience with messing with memory controller rails on AMD GPUs is that's how I killed a lot of AMD GPU. Well, I didn't kill that many AMD GPUs, but the AMD GPUs that I did kill, I blew up a memory controller. So I don't really want to mod the memory controller on this. First, because I don't want to blow this up, right? Again, I want to keep this card working for as long as possible. So yeah, that kind of sucks. Arguably really sucks, but still. It did take the Firestrike record. It runs really cool because, you know, it is a Vapor X card, so this heatsink that it comes with, like, there's your little vapor chamber, right? Then it's also got the 2 heat pipes. So it runs really cool on just the stock cooler. So I did all of my overclocking on the stock cooler. I didn't go to water cooling. And maybe if it's a... Actually, I should test the card on water cooling just in case it is a thermal issue, because if we go from air cooling to water cooling, then... And it is a thermal issue, then I'll notice it. Yeah, in which case it might make sense to reduce memory controller voltage. Or maybe I should just run the card cold. That's also an option, right? Yeah, so you have the little vapor chamber. And also, if you're wondering why I have like thermal paste on the memory chips, it's because The gap between the heatsink, like these plates on the heatsink, and the actual memory chips is so small that I don't have thermal pads that fit in there. And I have 0.5 millimeter thermal pads, and those are still too thick. So, yeah, I don't know what like Sapphire was thinking when they designed this, because like the thermal paste works. Like that works just fine. Putting thermal paste on there. Like it even spreads out. Like I didn't put that much thermal, like I didn't manually spread it out. I just put a line, and then it's like this is what it compressed to on its own. So, yeah, the gap there is really really quite small. Um and yeah, so the cooler works pretty well. Unfortunately, that also didn't help the memory clock, because the should managing the camera and talking at the same time is not my strong suit. But yeah, so the memory didn't really benefit from the, like, I assume it ran a bit cooler, but that didn't really help either. It's just like it's the memory controller. So like, because the thing is like if you raise the core voltage, it gets really obvious. Like immediately you get worse memory stability, just immediately. It's not even like a couple seconds into the like it's not even a couple minutes, like halfway through the benchmark. It's just like right at the freaking start of the benchmark. If you raise the core voltage enough, it instantly starts artifacting. So I don't think, like, I don't really think it's a thermal effect. It seems to be some kind of weird voltage relationship between the memory controller and the core. So I'd assume that maybe there's like a voltage gap requirement where it's like the memory controller has to be within X millivolts of the core to run certain memory frequencies, in which case I guess you have to raise the memory controller voltage. But as I said, that's how I blew up a really good RX 480. So I don't really want to be doing that on this. So I'm good, like, because yeah, like this card seems pretty good. So I'll pick up a different one and blow that up instead. And then, if that, well, try to blow that up instead. If that doesn't blow up, then this is getting that same modification, assuming that it fixes the memory clock. Because, yeah, I do want to push it even further, because, like, I already have a run with this card at 1400 megahertz core on the stock air cooler. I want to do 1500. I want to do 1500 on the stock air cooler, and with memory that doesn't suck. Because the thing is, if you actually have with GPUs, it's really funny. If you have a big enough memory bottleneck, your GPU core is going to be so starved for things to work on that you're going to hit higher clocks, just because because if the GPU core is stalled out for memory access, it's not producing as much heat as if it was actually doing work. So if you hit a really hard memory bottleneck, like this hits as you raise the core voltage, you can clock way higher than you should be able to, because the core doesn't get as hot as it should, and it's not doing as much work as it should. So it runs cooler and it runs more stable, and you can do more clock than is actually viable. So yeah, I had a 260X, so an R7 260X like that, where before I fixed, like, it also had a memory clock issue, except there it was just the memory chips getting really hot, and that was kind of that. But on a 260X I had like ages and ages ago, I could run like 1500 megahertz core, and then once I fixed the memory clock and got the memory to clock properly, I could only run like 1450. So I lost like 50 megahertz of core clock because, oh look, the memory bottleneck is gone. The core's actually doing work now. It's getting way hotter and much less stable as a result. So yeah, I'm definitely not done with this, because this is like, I take this as a challenge, right? Like, this is one of those cards where it's not just raise voltage for more gigahertz. And I find that rather more interesting to work with than cards where it's just like raise core voltage until your cooling system is inadequate. Then upgrade your cooling system and raise core voltage until your cooling system is yet again inadequate. And at some point you're going to be on liquid nitrogen and you're going to max out the core voltage, and that's the end of it. Right? So, and I'd say a lot of the time that's not that interesting. I also enjoy messing with cards like this, where it's just like, oh, you actually have to put some thought into what you're doing, because you can't just raise the core voltage, like crank up the core and expect the score to get better, because this actually scores worse as you keep raising the core clock, because at some point you're going to be trading too much memory speed for core clock. So yeah, pretty fun little card to mess with. And yeah, I have plans for it in the future, which is also why I have so much unoccupied space here, because actually I didn't plan this out. I should have cut this proto board. I should have cut that down the center instead, like I should have cut it lengthwise, not widthwise, because well, I think well, no, actually that wouldn't have worked out because it wouldn't have cleared the 6-pin. So I guess I'll just stack like memory controller on top of the memory voltage. And then if I assume this down here is the PEX rail, I'll stack, like, I'll put the PEX rail on its own separate thing. And then I don't know where I'll put the rest of the screw terminals. I did not think this through that well. I'll figure something out. Might just repurpose something. Actually, I could just probably get like a better connector panel or something on there. Anyway, so yeah, that's the 7770, and I guess I'll show you the Fire Strike score that I got with it. Actually, let's just leave it out like this. So yeah, fun little card to mess with. Definitely going to mess with it more, just because it's more interesting than, you know, like 7970s on ambient cooling are literally just like raise voltage, get more score, raise voltage, get more score. Oh, you're too high voltage, it doesn't clock anymore. That's like basically a 7970, so pretty boring. This, not so much. So anyway, here's the actual Fire Strike score. So yeah, first place. I had first place with this card before any of the mods, because this card's just ridiculously good at memory clock for no apparent reason. Because at stock voltage, this card does like 1650 memory clock. So yeah, and as you can see here, I'm actually losing memory clock because of the extra core voltage that I'm running, but still got the high score, right? And the 7940X actually doesn't do that much because this score is so low, as well as that is so low that, like, as long as your physics score is like higher than 20k, the difference between, like, you can try this, run this through Elmore's 3D Mark calculator. If you have like a 5k GPU and then like a 30 or, well, like a 20k or a 30k physics and then a 1.5k combined, your physics score has to increase like a ton before it makes any real impact on your overall score. So yeah, it like the 7940X here is like, it might look initially really unfair, but it doesn't actually make that much of a difference. Because if we look at like the second place score, all right, which is the guy who originally dethroned me, like he's losing quite significantly on GPU as well as combined, right? And that's where most of the difference is, because he still has the 9900K. The physics score really doesn't matter that much when the card is this slow. Like, having a really high physics score when your card is this slow doesn't actually do much. So yeah, it's not like, if your card's slow enough, your CPU gets irrelevant at some point. So yeah, unfortunately, if you actually pair this card with a CPU that like is reasonable for a card of this speed, then your physics score is going to be so low that it will actually matter. So yeah, it's kind of the one down, like, yeah, that's the one, I guess. Like, you'd still need like maybe a 26, well, no, I think even a 2400G, no, a 2400G would not be slow enough, but like a 2600 would probably put down enough physics score to be competitive on one of these, even against like my 7940X, because again, it's mostly about the GPU at that point. Because the 2600 should get like close to 15k or more than 15k physics, so you'd have more than enough score. So yeah, that's the 77. Like, this is basically a Buildzoid edition card. Like, that's what I'm working with here. So this is the 7770 Buildzoid edition. And unfortunately, this one is not gonna see like sub-ambient cooling, because I don't want to kill it. I really don't want to kill it. Also, I don't think any of my LN2 pots actually clear the mounting, like clear the VRM over here. And as I said, I'm not e-powering this. I want to keep the PCB relatively stock. So, well, okay, not relatively stock, but I don't want to like break the card just to get higher scores out of it. There. That's what I meant. So yeah, that's it. Hopefully this was somewhat interesting. Maybe it'll inspire you to go on your own modding adventures on random irrelevant pieces of GPUs, right? You can go take down my score if you think your 7770 is better. I kind of doubt it, because it's not like I'm doing anything that special with my card. It's just that I have a huge memory clock advantage. But maybe everybody else is running like stupid amounts of core voltage and they're not realizing that they're just killing their overall, like killing their score, because your combined test goes to, like, I actually have a run of Firestrike where the combined score is even higher than the one that I posted, but the GPU score isn't high enough. But that run, I was still running like 1650 memory, and it makes such a big difference in combined. It's ridiculous. But yeah, 7770s, pretty fun to mess with. Other cards that I would say are fun to mess with are, of course, the Pitcairns and Bonaire. Bonaire is also really, really fun, because it's rather easy to mod and everything. Well, actually, on Bonaire, you have to remove the current limit, but I mean, you can like, that would potentially be a thing to do on this card as well. Like, this does have a current limit. It's just I've not hit it yet. Like, the issue is it's artifacting. It doesn't randomly shut down. So no reason to mess with that yet. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon, and what else is there? There's the Patreon, and I have Teespring. There's like shirts and socks and posters and stickers and all kinds of merch available there. There's links to both the Patreon and Teespring down in the description below. So yeah, if you'd like to support my GPU addiction, you can see it right here. Fun, actually. No, okay, it's not so bad that, like, it just crossed my mind that the cost of the capacitors that I added to the GPU might be exceeding the cost of the GPU, but that's not actually the case. I haven't used any of the, like, stupid expensive aluminum, SMD aluminum polymer Panasonics. Like, I have a few capacitors in my like collection of capacitors to use for modding that are like $1 a piece. If I put 20 of those on this card, then actually they're like £1 a piece, not $1. Like, they're $1 a piece in the US, but here in the UK we have taxes, so they're £1 a piece here. And yeah, if I put 20 of those on this card, then that would actually be more value in capacitors on card than the actual card itself, which is, like, I think I have a couple cards that might be approaching that. This is not one of them, because the 560s. These Nichicons are actually cheaper than what I normally use. The 1200s are actually more expensive. So, yeah. Anyway, you get the idea. You know, if you'd like to support the channel, there's all those options. And I'll just hit the stop button. Otherwise, this video is actually going to hit 40 minutes. It might have even already.